Shabbat Shalom. In addition to our choir making beautiful music on the bima this evening, you may have noticed that the piano that Jonathan Dinkin is playing isn't the same old one we always had. For many years we had a black upright piano, and a few months ago this beautiful baby grand was donated to the temple. And Jonathan, you can tell me better than my ear can tell, I think it makes pretty nice music. Pretty good? The reason I can't tell is because, to the extent that one can, I flunked piano lessons. There was a big problem with me and piano lessons. Actually, there were a couple of problems. One was being able to sit still and practice, but that's a different discussion for a different time. One problem was that between our house and Mrs. Drake's house, Mrs. Drake was the piano teacher, there was a local fast food joint that was pretty good. And they had really good French fries. And so Danny Boy, as he was walking from home to the piano lesson, would stop and get French fries and show up with greasy fingers. Mrs. Drake never much liked that. My parents didn't like that I didn't do so hot in piano lessons either. The other part actually came later, which was two things happened about the same time. One was when Vladimir Horowitz played a huge concert in the middle 80s. I don't even remember where it was, but it was a huge televised concert. And on TV, they were showing these elegant hands playing the keys with just unbelievable ability, with very little movement, but it was staggering. And then one Shabbat afternoon, as it was, I was at a Nebraska football game, and for the national anthem, they wheeled the baby grand piano out to the 50-yard line, and Van Cliburn came out and played the national anthem. I didn't know who Van Cliburn was, but I learned that day. And I watched both of them. They were both about the same time. And I realized that my stubby little fingers were never going to be like Vladimir Horowitz's or like Van Cliburn's. And while I could try and maybe get somewhere, I wasn't going to get there. And then years later, I read about Horowitz, who was once asked about playing the piano, and he looked up and said something like, the notes are no different. It's the pauses between the notes. That's what counts. I love that idea, because the pauses I could do. The notes, Now that easily leads me to the pause that we all know of as Shabbat, right? And you know the story that every rabbi always tells about how Shabbat is this wonderful time to take a deep breath, to relax. And yeah, I have to talk about it a little bit, so stay with me, but we'll get past it. So to start, look, Shabbat is this gift. It's a gift that comes every week. It's a gift that says, forget about everything else in the rest of the world. Forget about all the craziness of the workaday world. Give yourself the gift of spending 24 hours removed from it all. Give yourself the gift of downtime. Give yourself the gift of family time. Give yourself the gift of no wristwatch to wear, no alarm clock to go off. These are the blessings that come with Shabbat, and they are true blessings that most of us don't fully appreciate. But beyond that gift, that short pause that comes each week, there is a bigger pause that our tradition describes, and in many ways it can be seen as the Jewish gift to humanity and the Jewish gift to social theory and social policy. It was the idea that we can't work all the time. After all, Shabbat is sort of the first organized work week. It's the first labor movement of any kind. To say that workers can't work all the time, you have to give them breaks. And then in this week's Torah portion at Bahar, we read about the Sabbatical Year and the Jubilee Year, that in addition to not being able to work 7 days a week, you can't work every year either. You need to give yourself a break. Now, most of us aren't lucky enough to live in a world where we can take a sabbatical every 7 years, but we can find ways to pull back from our workaday world from time to time. And that's what the Torah portion describes. It talks about leaving our fields fallow for a year. It talks about removing all of the stresses of our everyday world and just being. It's a tall order, but it's also an essential order. Those moments, our tradition understands, are big transitional moments for us. They are times every 6 years when we need to recharge, every 49 years when historically speaking, our tradition let all debts go free, when everything returned back to its original owner, and when everyone was granted a pause, a break, a time to reflect, a time to re-energize, and a time to renew. So what do we do in the modern world with all of this? Because unless we're really in academia, we're not going to get a sabbatical. And we're certainly not going to get a Jubilee year where our home mortgage is written off for us in the 49th year, though it's not a bad idea. But we do have a way to look at the world and look at ourselves. And we have a choice to make. Can we concentrate on the notes or the pauses? And so what I want to suggest this Shabbat is that this place, this temple, can be the home base for that new kind of thinking. If we allow ourselves to accept the radical idea that we're going to focus on the pause rather than the note, think of what's possible. If we radically recharge ourselves, what will happen to our community? It will become recharged too. Now let's play this out in a couple of different ways. So if we focus on the pause rather than on the note, what does a Shabbat dinner look like at the temple? Well, for starters, it probably looks like a pretty full room. It might look like a meal that happens every week. It might look like a meal that's free. Our friends at Chabad down the street have figured out this secret, and they've cleaned our clocks with it for decades now. If you invite people to a Shabbat meal and welcome them in and don't talk about money, odds are pretty good you're going to start a good relationship. And so what if we embrace that radical hospitality of serving food at every occasion and not asking for money for it? Now you might say, well, we'll go broke. That's what'll happen. And you might be right. But if we're going to be serious about this radical rethinking and about focusing on the pauses, then one of our tasks is to find the angels among us who will help us. To reach out to them and say, look, we've had this all wrong. We focused on the notes and not at the pauses, and we need your help to help us figure this out and to help us change our community. Think of how that idea works with all the programmatic things we do. As it is today, we have films and concerts, we have classes, we now seem to be on a roll of having regular travel experiences. Imagine if those all become part of the pausing rather than the notes themselves. Imagine parents bringing their children to our Sunday schools and our religious schools, and their parents staying for classes, not because they're forced, but because they see the power of that pause. Imagine what it would look like. Look around this room tonight. How many people do you count in this room who have children who are school age? There's the bar mitzvah family and there's my family. Do you see any others? What's that telling us? We're missing something. It's not that they don't know about it. It's not that they're not aware. The question is, are we focusing on the right thing? Imagine the idea of discovery, radically reimagined. What if we saw the temple as a place to explore oneself rather than to explore a tradition? What if we saw the temple as a place to encounter the other as opposed to being forced to listen to something and to learn a tradition that's been passed down? What if we saw the temple as a place where we could discover community and create community rather than have community forced upon us? It's a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of understanding it. But I think it might just be the right way. If we're to do all of this, it's going to take enormous will on our part. But you know, when the first generation of Jews came along and said, you know what? We're not working 7-day weeks. We're only working 6. That took a lot of will too. And when our people came along and said, after 6 years, we're going fallow for a year, that took will too. And when our people came along and said, after 49 years, we're having a Jubilee year, that took will too. So the question is, in our time, in our days, when the empty pews outnumber the full ones, are we willing to reimagine? Are we willing to recognize the truth in front of us? We don't have it right. We've made mistakes. We can't do it as we've always done it before. One of my teachers, a fellow Omahan actually, is Ron Wolfson. Ronnie grew up, went to the same high school I did. In fact, my mother was his first French teacher, which is either why he is beautifully fluent in French or can't speak a lick, depending on who you ask. Ronnie has spent his life trying to help Jews engage and connect with community and with each other. Ronnie puts it very succinctly in his newest book. He says it's all about relationships. He's right. When you focus on the relationship you have with another person, you're not looking at the note, you're looking at the pause. When you spend time figuring out what it is that we connect with, why it is that we can smile with each other, why it is that we can learn together, why it is that we feel comfortable in each other's presence, then we're allowing ourselves to pause. We're allowing ourselves to sit back and take a breather and say, wait a second, there's a lot going on here. So in his new book, Relational Judaism, Ron talks about all of this, and he makes suggestions for what this new kind of congregation can be. He may well be talking about our congregation. He's not, but he just as easily could be. And so it is on this Shabbat that we encounter this wonderful, radical, revolutionary idea, this idea of pausing and sanctifying that holy rest. I hope that it becomes not just a temporary rest for all of us gathered this evening, but rather becomes the launching pad for a reimagined, a re-energized, and a re-understood tradition and community and peoplehood. Shabbat Shalom.